What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Hope Estheim. Hope is a 2/2 human wizard for white-blue that has lifelink, and, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent mills X cards, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn. Funnily enough, Hope combines two strategies that a lot of Commander players dislike in mill and life gain. Personally, I've always been a big fan of mill, so Hope is right up my alley. He even mills in the best way possible, since one of the hardest things to do with the mill deck is actually survive long enough to mill through everyone's libraries. The fact that he mills via life gain helps mitigate this, since the only real easy way to stop someone who focuses on gaining as much life as possible is to kill them with commander damage. Since only certain strategies can really do that, Hope becomes one of the better mill commanders out there, since he has built-in defense as well. For this deck tech, we'll be focusing more so on the life gain aspect of Hope, with a few supplemental mill cards to help make sure we can close out the game. With that, let's get into the card highlights. We'll start out by looking at the supplemental mill cards, since there's going to be less of a focus on these than the ones that gain us life. Fracture Sanity and Maddening Cacophony are two spells that mill each opponent for a certain number of cards, depending on how much mana is used to cast them. The Cacophony gets you the most bang for your buck, since it can mill half of their library for a combined 6 mana, making it much easier to get the rest of their cards with Hope's ability. Sphinx Mindbreaker is an ETB effect that mills each opponent for 10 cards, and leaves around a 6/6 flyer in cases where you need to block a creature or can otherwise kill someone with damage. Ruin Crab and Psychic Corrosion are great reoccurring mill sources, since they'll mill each opponent whenever you play a land or draw a card respectively. Since these are things we want to be doing as much as possible anyways, they're great on-theme payoffs for doing so. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is exile instead of normal mill, but can be very effective, especially if you're playing against a deck that has a super low mana curve, like an aggro or Cheerios deck. The fact that it exiles also makes it great against graveyard-based decks, making it an all-around solid choice. Another great way to get some extra mill is to simply play cards that increase the number of cards milled whenever it occurs. For this, we have another great mill commander in Bruvak the Grandiloquent, which mills double the number of cards whenever it occurs. Needless to say, with certain half their library cards, this can simply mill someone out on the spot, making it an obvious include in the deck. The Water Crystal is another card that, while not doubling mill, increases the number of cards by 4. For effects that mill a small amount of cards consistently, like Psychic Corrosion, this can be almost as good as Bruvak, since it can greatly increase the number of cards you mill your opponents for. It also has great utility since it makes your blue spells cost 1 less, and even has a built-in mana sink that lets you mill opponents for even more. Now for the crux of the deck, life gain. This comes in many shapes and forms, but the important thing is that we try to get as much life as we can in our turn to maximize Hope's ability to its fullest extent. To start with, we have 2 cheap spells that do nothing but gain us life in Chaplain's Blessing and Rest for the Wary. While these are very narrow in what they actually do, it's important to remember that the main goal is to get the biggest trigger we can for Hope, making these very cost-effective ways of doing so. Elixir of Immortality is another cheap effect that gains us some life, and even lets us get our best cards that we've already used back into our library, letting us potentially get and cast them again. For effects that can give us large bursts of life, we have Congregate and War Report, 2 cards that gain us life based on the number of creatures on the battlefield. Congregate gives us 2 per creature, while War Report only gives us 1, but also counts artifacts as well. Against certain strategies, like token or artifact based ones, these can be some of our most effective ways to gain a ton of life in a turn. Beacon of Immortality can double our life total, going from 40 to a whopping 80 if we're still at our starting. While this card says it just doubles the life total, it's important to remember that any effect worded like this actually gains or loses you life for it to work, meaning it will still count towards Hope's ability. Heliod's Intervention and Sanguine Sacrament are another 2 cards that can gain you a ton of life in a turn, albeit depending on how much mana you can pump into it. These cards are great late game enders, since you should naturally have more mana the longer the game goes. Plus, Heliod's Intervention can also act as removal if need be, making it a great modular option. Wall of Reverence is a slower but consistent source of life gain, and one you can still use with Hope's ability, so long as you stack the triggers appropriately so that this one resolves first. Catechist, Staff of Hermes, and Steel of the Godhead are great ways to give one of your creatures lifelink that may not already have it, making for yet another source of life gain. They're also effective when used with Hope, since unblockable or a huge power increase and damage prevention are great ways to make sure his own lifelink effect can get you extra life gain in a turn. Celestine the Living Saint is another creature that has natural lifelink, and even gets you back a creature at the end of turn depending on how much life you gained. Since we're all about gaining life, this will basically be an unrestricted reanimation effect every turn, making for a great include in the deck. For more unusual sources of life gain, we have two blue cards that I rather enjoy in Delusions of Mediocrity and Delusions of Grandeur. These are cards that gain you 10 or 20 life respectively when they enter, but will also take that life away if they leave the battlefield. While this makes them more risky options, the hope would be that the life lost from these effects wouldn't hurt us too much, since we should be gaining a bunch of life anyways in most circumstances. The benefit they provide, 10 or 20 life in a turn that turns into the equivalent mill from hope, should outweigh this risk by quite a bit, making them very effective ways to burst mill our opponents. Just like with the mill increase cards, we also have a number of ones that'll increase the total amount of life we gain whenever we gain it. Boon Reflection, Rock's Faithmender, and Alhamrit's Archive all double the life we gain from effects, making for extremely effective ways to truly maximize Hope's ability. I mean, combine these with the two previously mentioned cards, and you can easily mill your opponent for 20 or 40 cards in a single turn. The Archive even doubles card draw for you, other than your first one, giving you some extra card advantage to boot. The Wind Crystal is another card that doubles life gain and, like the Water Crystal before it, also makes white spells cost one less to cast, making for a very efficient card in multiple scenarios. Cleric class only increases life gain by 1, but includes other abilities that can be effective in certain situations. This is especially true for its level 2, since it'll let you put +1/+1 counters on Hope whenever you gain life. The bigger Hope can become, the more life he'll gain in combat, making for a way to get exponentially more mill if either card isn't dealt with. One great thing about the cards we have access to for this deck is that a lot of the card draw effects tend to have incidental life gain attached to them as well. Sphinx's Revelation is one of the better blue-white spells that do this, letting you draw cards and gain life equal to how much mana you can pump into it. Kiss of the Amisha is a bit costly for how many cards it draws, but it can give you a whopping 7 life, more than making up for this in a Hope deck. Sphinx's Insight can give you cards in a pinch if you need them, but can also gain you some life if you can wait to cast it until your main phase, making it a nice situational card draw effect. Cloudblazer and Elite Guard Mage are both creatures that have enter the battlefield effects that draw you cards and give you some life. The fact that they're creatures is a boon to us, since they can be used as defensive fodder, given lifelink with some of our other effects to give us more life gain, or simply act as good reanimation targets for things like Celestine to get back over and over again. Draugskull Reaver is pretty much the entire package. It's a creature that has double strike and lifelink, meaning you'll get 2 life gain triggers from it during combat, and is probably the best card draw ability in the deck, since we'll be gaining a lot of life in various increments throughout the game. The Gaffer is another great source of draw, since it can let you draw a card on each player's turn, so long as you can gain the requisite life on that turn. While we're focusing more so on gaining life on our turn, since that's required by Hope's ability, the fact that we could fire off an instant life gain source to draw a card on an opponent's turn is a nice option. Faithful Mending is a nice cheap way to gain some life and loot 2 cards, and even has flashback, letting you do it a second time, all at instant speed. There are also a number of good utility cards that work well with our overall themes. Shabraz the Sky Shark is a great way to get some incidental life gain, while also making a larger and larger flying creature that's good on offense or defense. It can also give Hope flying with its activated ability, since Hope is a human, making for a great way to get some extra damage and life in combat from him. Will, Scion of Peace is an absolutely phenomenal way to make our spells cost less, by significant amounts in some cases. Pair this with a Sphinx's Revelation after gaining a good amount of life that turn, and you'll be able to draw more cards than anyone else at the table. Y'shtola Rule can not only flicker out our creatures that have great ETBs, but also lets us get an additional Hope trigger, since she gives us another end step. Needless to say, but having multiple Hope triggers in a single turn is going to be a great way to close out a game. Honor the Fallen is a great graveyard hate spell that has a potentially good amount of life gain attached to it. The fact that it's an instant makes it even better, since you could cast it in response to some sort of reanimation effect, like a Rise of the Dark Realms. Righteous Confluence is a great modular spell that could get you whatever you need at that specific time, whether it's more creatures, enchantment removal, or life gain. Being able to mix and match the modes is what makes a card especially great. Aetherflux Reservoir is both a life gain source and a potential win con, since you can easily snipe opponents off if you're able to gain enough. This is a nice alternative win con, since sometimes milling each opponent out can be hard to do depending on the situation. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include some removal that gains you life in Fumigate and Sanctify, the best Lifegain based mana rock in Pristine Talisman, and even lands that give you some extra life in Radiant Fountain and Kabira Crossroads. Hope is one of the most divisive characters in all of Final Fantasy, so it seems apt to me that his abilities focus around Lifegain and Mill, two strategies that are either loved or hated, with little middle ground among players. Barring that, I think the implementation of these strategies in Hope is actually rather unique and exciting. Milling opponents based on how much life you can gain in your turn? Love it or hate it, that's a pretty unique and cool way to go about it. It's also a pretty strong way to do it. One of Mill's weakest aspects is that it could take a while to actually win a game with it, since you have to mill over effectively 250 or so cards. Imagine if you had to do that much damage to everyone to end the game. It would take a seriously long time, and that's what can happen with mill strategies. Since it takes a while, you need to make sure you have good defenses, and Lifegain is one way to achieve this. Yes, it doesn't stop you from being killed from commander damage, but it does help against normal damage, which is what a lot of decks rely on to finish off opponents. So the fact that you could protect yourself from losing, while also enabling your mill strategy, is what really makes Hope's design shine. If you love Lifegain or Mill, or just like to play with thematically unique commanders, then Hope may be just what you're looking for. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Hope Estheim. The full deck list outline in this video can be found at the Archedeck link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.